5, 4. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Starboard Portal. Today we have John Pearce with us speaking about a College Sailing 101 information session, and later on he's going to be joined by Janel Szarkowski, who is the former head coach of Georgetown University and now a coach in the Feeble Sailors program at U.S. Sailing, in addition to Allison Crowley, who can give us the student perspective as a senior at Cal Poly. If you have questions for any of these three, feel free to drop them in the chat. Don't be shy about telling us your name, if you're a student, parent, a coach, or otherwise, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to JP. Thanks.
Thanks, Brittany. How's everybody doing? Good to be here. I'm back. Thanks for those of you who joined us last week for Squaring the Pyramid and have been checking out the Starboard Portal, all these great presentations. Had a great one yesterday from Quantum Sales. Some more great ones coming up tomorrow with SPT Fitness in the morning. So keep tuning in. We're happy to accompany you through our coronavirus quarantine and all that stuff. It's good to be here. So my name is John Pearce. I am currently the youth director at U.S. Sailing. And prior to starting here about 4 years ago, I was a college sailing coach for a pretty long time. I spent 4 years as the head coach at George Washington University. Prior to that, I was 3 years as the co-head coach at Dartmouth College. I also spent 1 year as an assistant coach at Stanford University and 1 year as an assistant coach at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in upstate New York. And before that, I went to Hobart College, was a 4-year sailor there. And really enjoyed that experience. I grew up in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes and really enjoyed my transition from being a youth sailor and kind of trying to figure it out, but maybe not putting it all together, to being a college sailor and a part of a really successful team up at Hobart. So today we're going to kind of dig right into the nitty gritty of college sailing. Got two special guests that I'll call on throughout the presentation here to add their perspective. Janel Szarkowski has been one of the most successful college sailing coaches over the last decade with Georgetown University as assistant coach. And Allison Crowley is a graduating senior this year from Cal Poly and has done a great job building up that program as a club program to get into the national championship and really strengthening their depth of their roster and everything like that. So some good perspectives there. What I want to remind you is that this is best if you provide your questions. So in the chat box, go ahead and throw your questions in or your observations anytime. If right now, it would be helpful if people could just throw their questions in and say, whether they are a student, a parent, a coach, whatever perspective you have and kind of where you're from. Let us know, because that's helpful for us to know who's out there. And then any questions you have along the way, just throw them out. At the end, we'll have an Ask Us Anything session where we can get into all the hardball questions that you can think of. All right, looks like we got a good turnout too, over 100. Let's see if we can beat the quantum presentation from yesterday. All right, so we're going to start out with a few slides just about what is college sailing. And for the purposes of these slides, I'm not really talking about college sailing, just the Intercollegiate Association. We're also talking about college sailing for anyone who is college aged and the sailing you might do while you're in college. So I'm going to queue up my presentation here. So what is college sailing? Well, the short answer is college sailing is the Intercollegiate Sailing Association, the ICSA. So the ICSA is the governing authority for college sailing in the US. It is divided into 7 conferences. And those represent all different corners of the country. And each of those conferences has definitely its own special flavor and kind of approach to college sailing. So probably the first thing you should consider if you're a prospective college sailor is simply what part of the country are you considering sailing in? And that has a lot to do with sailing, but it has even more to do with your college experience and what kind of college you want to attend. So I'm going to zoom in on this lovely map. I learned not long ago that Allison Crowley actually is the person who helped create this map. So this is our pins of the map of where college sailing is happening around the country in these different conferences. So over here in the upper left corner is the Pacific Northwest. Then we have the Pacific Coast Sailing Conference down here in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Then we have the Southeastern Sailing Conference, which is in the Texas and sort of Midwest area. We have the South Atlantic Sailing Conference down in the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee. The Midwest Sailing Conference up in the Great Lakes region. The Mid-Atlantic Sailing Conference in the Mid-Atlantic region. And then the NISA, New England Sailing Conference, up in the New England area. College sailing originated in New England. So you can see there's a really dense cluster, especially in the Boston area, where some of the first college sailing took place at places like MIT, and has kind of grown from there. So something you'll want to consider as a prospective student would simply be, what part of the country do you want to be in? Obviously, the more north you are, the more you're going to be sailing in cold weather and probably having a longer off season. The more south or Pacific coast you are, the more you're going to have longer sailing seasons, better weather, but you're still guaranteed to sail in some cold regattas either way. So that's the ICSA. We're going to circle back to a lot about the ICSA, but wanted to also make sure we're surfacing some of the other cool things that go on in college sailing and for college-aged sailors. It shouldn't be overlooked that there's a lot of opportunities for big boat racing. And, big boat sailing is important because most adult sailors after college continue sailing larger boats, and less adults sail the dinghies. So big boat sailing should certainly not be overlooked. And it's actually one of the coolest opportunities out there at a lot of colleges. There are quite a few colleges that have both a dinghy program as well as a big boat program. And that can be a great way for sailors who maybe aren't as keen on dinghies or want a different kind of experience, or are just really passionate about sailing bigger boats on bigger teams and learning all those positions. So there's I split it into two categories here. Here we have the offshore, quote unquote, but this is really inshore because this is buoy racing. It's often called offshore because that distinguishes it from being dinghies, but we're talking about going out and doing a series of races throughout a day or a weekend at these regattas. The Storm Tri-Sail Intercollegiate Offshore Regatta is every year at Larchmont Yacht Club and is really awesome. Huge participation at over 47 boats this year. And a lot of different teams participate in that one, including dinghy teams. We'll send a team to that one. The Kennedy Cup and the McMillan Cup are at the U.S. Naval Academy, sailed in their Academy Navy 44s. And those are some really great historic regattas. The Kennedy Cup is named after JFK, and tons of great history with those events. The Harbor Cup is out in Long Beach, sailed in their Cal 37s, which are really awesome boats, also used for match racing and things like that. And a new event in the Great Lakes Intercollegiate Offshore Regatta is sailed in Tartan 10s. And there's many more. There's definitely some down in the South Atlantic. They're all over the place. So prospective sailors might consider the sort of big boat racing circuit. And then another kind of equally important discipline here, and perhaps even more exciting in some ways, is the true offshore distance racing scene, which there's less overall, but the opportunities that are there are obviously really in depth and intense. So Oak Cliff, which is in Long Island Sound, is probably the most prominent sort of training and racing facility for this type of offshore sailing. It's not specific to college sailors, but it certainly includes a lot of college-aged sailors. And doing that kind of offshore training is super important for anyone who wants to go into a career as a pro sailor or in the marine industry. The new thing on the block is the Collegiate Offshore Sailing Circuit, which is a new kind of upstart sailing circuit for college sailors, using 10 of the Figaro 2 offshore yachts. Those are boats that are used a ton in France for offshore training. And there are now 10 boats as a part of this circuit that are partnering with different colleges and military academies to do like a true offshore racing circuit. And that's a big kind of an upstart. So if you're interested in getting your college involved in that or finding out where that's going on, go ahead and Google that Collegiate Offshore Sailing Circuit and check out their website because there's a lot of cool stuff on there. Another really interesting upstart is the Young American Sailing Academy. Some of you might be familiar with that group because they've done very, very well in the Bermuda race with youth teams in the past. And their new focus is on the mixed double-handed offshore Olympic format, which is a really cool new thing that's going to start in the Paris 2024 Olympics. It is a distance race, an overnight distance race in 30-something foot boats, sailed with one man, one woman for Olympic medals, and really kind of innovative new format. And the Young American Sailing Academy is focused on starting up some of the training for that. So that's sort of the big boat circuit. A lot of great sailors come out of the college big boat circuit. I know that the head manager of the American Magic sailing team is a product of this kind of offshore intercollegiate stuff. And then another really important opportunity for everyone to be aware of when it comes to sort of college-aged sailing is what's going on in high performance sailing, and particularly the opportunity that's coming with the LA 2028 Olympics. Los Angeles is going to host the Olympics in July of 2028. And so that means these next 8 years are a huge opportunity to basically invest in high performance sailing and have domestic racing and training opportunities in Olympic class boats and other similar, fast boats. So the Olympic disciplines are listed on the left of this slide. Some of them are existing, the first 6 here. So the laser radial, the 470 will become a mixed male and female boat. The 49er, one male team, and 49er FX, one female team. And the NACRA 17 is also a mixed one male, one female boat. The new disciplines coming up down the pike here are the foiling windsurfer, which is poised to really revolutionize windsurfing. And everyone who's participating in that I've heard from says it is just totally awesome. The foiling kiteboard, which most of us are familiar with, at least from watching at this point, amazing machines. And that's actually a kind of interesting format of mixed relay for the upcoming Olympics, or the future Olympics, I should say. And then this double-handed offshore format as well. So that's really cool. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is for college-age sailors now and in the future, if you're interested in sailing these high-performance boats, you can do it domestically at a very high level. The circuit that you see here with the West Coast Series, Cork, Oak Cliff, and Florida is taken from a slide that was given at the Sailing Leadership Forum this winter, outlining the LA 2028 effort. And that West Coast Series of a Olympic classes regatta in Long Beach, another one in San Diego, and another one in San Francisco. My understanding is that those will be annual events. So if you are an aspiring, say, 49er sailor, you would certainly do well to go to California each summer and sail in those 3 big regattas and train between them. All right, we got a couple questions, so I'm going to take a quick pause here. Alice says, do colleges have programs that are not about racing, but emphasize learning how to sail, to practice teamwork, leadership, and followership? Yes. I think most of the formats we're looking at here are going to be geared towards racing, but there are plenty of college programs that also have more of a community sailing and learn to sail aspect. One of the ones that really jumps to mind is College of Charleston, which is essentially a community sailing center. And they have all sorts of great learn to sail programming, disabled sailing, sailing for veterans, really, really cool stuff. So there are definitely other college sailing programs that have that more kind of learn to sail aspect. A lot of colleges just offer sailing lessons. When I was the assistant coach at Hobart College way back when, part of my gig was to teach 1 semester of sailing lessons as a PE credit. So there's a lot of that going on and a lot of access to sailing that's provided through that college experience. So that was a good question. Henry R. asked, what schools are already in the COSC? Let's find out. I just saw it the other day, so I might as well look it up. The colleges that are listed on their website are currently Massachusetts Maritime Academy, SUNY Maritime Academy, the Webb Institute, U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. So it looks like there are 4 schools signed on so far, and I'm sure there's others that are working on that. All right, so I wanted to touch on ICSA briefly, a little bit about big boat racing opportunities, and a little bit about this high performance stuff to make sure we're kind of looking at these big picture aspects of it. So with that, I'm going to prepare to queue up my first special guest, Janel Szarkowski, who I have the pleasure of working with here at US Sailing. And she is one of our Seabowl Sailors Program coaches for the Mid-Atlantic. And she has a long and storied history with college sailing, particularly as the assistant coach at Georgetown University for the last, how many years, Janel? 8?
This is my 8th season, yes.
8 seasons. So they've been very successful during that time. So very pleased to have Janel on here. And Janel's going to dig into a little bit more about the ICSA championship formats, and then a little bit about how those connect to the racing that is available to post-college sailors. So, Janel, I have it kind of chunked up with the fall championships and then the spring. So do you want to kind of run us through what these fall national championships are all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can start with the fall. Right now, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And JP, thanks for such a nice introduction. I'm truly humbled. But yeah, the fall national championship. So college sailing is the coolest. Like there's so many disciplines, there's so many kids involved. And one of the great things you can do is race at a very, very high level in so many ways. So you can see in the fall, we have women single-handed, men single-handed, and co-ed match racing. A few cool things is despite being in November and usually in a very cold venue, the lasers get to sail brand new boats. So you walk up, you're like unboxing a boat, and like your fingers are frigid trying to get the ring dings in. And it's really fun to sail brand new boats at the highest level for 2 days. Co-ed match racing, that one's I hold very close to my heart. I love match racing. I do it as much as I can. The format has a requirement of 1 female sailor, and we're starting to see more and more females driving, which is fantastic. And this format also has a knockout. So as opposed to keeping all the scores like all the other college sailing disciplines do, match racing has a knockout round. So after you do a round robin against all the teams, you have an 8 that knocks down to 4 that knocks down to the top 2. And it doesn't really matter what you did the day before. If you don't win that last race, you don't get the national championship. So these are some fun things about the fall.
Awesome. All right. And then in the spring, we got 3 more.
Yeah, in the spring, 3 more. So first up here, we have team racing. Everyone loves team racing. The format in college is 3 boats versus 3 boats, so 3v3. We have a ladder of events that lead towards each conference getting berths for a 16-team round. So you have a round robin. We go to an Elite 8. We get knocked down to 4. And in team racing, just like the other disciplines, you have to keep all of your scores. So that first day loss follows you all the way to the end. And the national champion is determined by the best score over those 3 days. So it's an intense 3 days. Limiting down, you do get knocked out, but you keep all of your scores. Women's dinghy and co-ed dinghy. These are massive events now. When I was in college, there was just 1 fleet of boats, and you would go out for 2 races, and you come back in, and then you get 2 races later, and you didn't even know if you won by the end because everything was handwritten and all that. So now it's a massive event. We have tech score. We have 36 teams. And each conference determines the top 36 teams that go to 2 semifinals. So semifinals is a 2-day event. You have one 18-boat regatta and then another 18-boat regatta happening at the same time. And the top 9 of these 2 events get to go to the finals. And that is immediately after, 2 days after. So the women's dinghy championship is 4 days long, 2 days of semifinals and 2 days of finals. And then when you do co-ed, you do the same. So it's a massive undertaking. So when you go into a postseason for the spring nationals, team racing, women's dinghy into co-ed dinghy, if you sail all 3 events, you sail 11 days in a row. And it's exhausting. And I don't think anyone likes sailing by the end of it, but I still like watching it.
Yeah, that's a long series of regattas. And I know there's a lot of, format kind of evolutions that are still ongoing at all times, trying to kind of figure out how to streamline all those different days of racing. And so I'm curious, Janel, all these different regattas reference on here, the conference qualifiers. Mm-hmm. So can you just briefly touch on how that works? Like, how do you get from your conference level to the nationals level?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So as JP mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's various conferences defined by the region of the United States that they're in. And based on, I'll say, the strength, or meaning how many people participate in that conference, the ICSA assigns berths. So there's certain conferences that have a lot more participants that get more berths to go to the semifinals for women's dinghy. So that number is predetermined and you go to your conference championship. So that's assigned by the conference. And how you do in that event, the top 4 get to go to team racing nationals, or the top 9 get to go to women's dinghy semifinals. So it's all predetermined, and then each conference has an event. So you get a two days to try your best and get to the nationals.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great experience at the nationals. And from your perspective, Janel, as being a part of a team that has been very, very successful over the years across all these different championships, what are just a couple of your top level tips in terms of what it takes to actually win some of these regattas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had to think about, JP gave me this question in advance, so I had some time to think about it. But yeah, I think there's 3 things that stick out in my mind for a successful team. One that is going to start practicing in the beginning of a season, go through a conference championship, and then still go to a nationals and do really well. And I think one of those is always treating practice like it's a regatta. So that might be taking it a little bit more seriously, or making sure you're accountable and being on time and being part of the drill, but making sure that how you show up to a regatta is the same way that you show up to practice. I think another really important part is creating and being accepting of mentorships within your team. So no matter how big or how small that team is, if you find someone that is better than you, going up to them and asking for their help, and if you're asked to help, willingly give that help. And that just creates a really good team culture, and you learn so much more from someone who's actually sailing the boat than going up to coach who sits in the motorboat and just watches and blows whistles. So I think that's extremely important. And then the third is remembering that being part of team is building relationships off the water. So having some fun ways to either socialize by, working out together or studying together or making food. Just having an outside relationship from the sailing team makes that relationship last so much longer, and it's so much stronger. Yeah.
Awesome. And next up, we're going to talk about some of the things that college sailors do after college in sailing. But first, I want to get to a question that's in the chat box. Keep the chat box going. Yeah. The question is there a way to find all the colleges that do sailing outside of the ICSA in one centralized place online? And the answer to that is, I do not believe so. Janel, do you know of anywhere where you would find that info?
I don't think I know that. No, I don't know if there's a centralized place to find that. That would take some digging.
Yeah, my short answer would be, depending on where you are, if there are colleges near you, give them a shout to like their college, rec sports department, activities, club sports kind of thing. And if they're doing sort of learn to sail, less intense racing stuff, it'll probably be through a club sports or activities board type thing. All right, so Janel, now we're going to shift gears briefly and talk about what post-college sailing looks like and what college sailors can do to transition. So, you did a great job sort of summarizing here what you learn in college. And so talk us through this. What is your viewpoint on this?
Yeah, I remember writing this morning. So what I was getting at here is that college sailing, it's a very short race course, and you do it over and over and over again, and you do it for so many days during a week, and then you do it so many weeks of the year. So you get so many hours doing this really intense shortened race course that college sailors are so good at a really short starting line and looking for options. They're really good at seeing tactical plays on a short upwind and not getting into trouble near a windward mark when everyone's going to get there at the same time, because they have so much practice doing it. So I think that makes them the perfect tactician right after college to hop on for someone who owns a boat that is just looking for extra crew, and sell yourself as this experienced tactician with 10,000 hours of practice under your belt. Where college sailors struggle is that you've been sailing an FJ or a Z420 or just like a sloop rig boat for 4 years. That's very, very basic. It's designed for youth, and we're still sailing them in college. So we need to know how to start tuning a rig, influencing sail shape, using fine-tuned controls, which we've never seen before, using a compass, because now the beats are a mile long instead of just 3 minutes, and then getting a big spinnaker up and down. So if you can't do those things or adapt to those things, those are the hard parts about moving on from college sailing.
Totally. Yeah, it's a lot easier as the college sailor to like nail the starts. When you get onto other types of sailing, it's just like second nature. You can't believe how good you are at it compared to everybody else. And then as soon as you're like trying to climb the mast or do some kind of fancy big boat stuff, it gets challenging. But and I suppose that's speaking from the dinghy sailor perspective. If you were to take that path that we talked about earlier with big boat racing, you'd be a pro at all that stuff. And so talk us through some of these post-college options that you listed out at the bottom, some of the different disciplines that are really popular with post-college sailors.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of from my experience. There's so many more options that I haven't listed here. But when I graduated from college, I was still looking for opportunities to fleet race. And the first place I landed was in the Lightning class. There's so many classes of boats that offer grants, meaning you apply and they'll give you a boat to go sailing for a season. So the Lightning grant had popped up when I was in college. I applied, I got to sail Lightning for a full season, and it got me hooked. And then I had this network of people. They kept helping me find boats. I didn't have to buy anything. It was just there for me to go sailing because they wanted more people involved. I know the J22 does that now. I'm thinking about applying for that even now because I don't own a boat and I want to go sailing. But there's classes of small dinghies and small keel boats in the US that have options for you to go sailing. Distance racing, there's so many short distance races that are 1 day long, like the Fagawi on the East Coast is, there's a Governor's Cup almost every bay you go to. It's like 1 day and one overnight. They're always looking for crew. It's easy to hop on. Those are the basics of a boat going in a straight line for a really long time. There's team racing options. I know one piece that college sailors miss so much is the intensity of team racing, and there is less team racing once you graduate college, but there's still 2 paths you can find. There's within yacht clubs, there's small keel boats that go team racing, and there's also a US circuit that does team racing in dinghies. That doesn't require you to be associated with the yacht club. There is match racing, and match racing is great because they have actually a professional circuit that you can tap into. So if you start in the US doing some regional events to go to the nationals for either youth, women, or co-ed, you can then jump to the international level as both a co-ed team and a women's team and sail the World Match Race Tour and the WIM Series, the Women's International Match Race Series. So there's so many options to keep racing as an adult. The US Sailing competition website has all of them listed out. And of course, if you are struggling which one to pick, you can always reach out to me because I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, you're the match race guru. And there's also like a crew finder function on the match racing website, isn't there? So if you want to get involved.
Yeah, there is. It was created by the U.S. Sailing Committee. Pearce and Potts, if anyone knows on the call, Pearce and Potts had this idea to get a crew finder online so that if you wanted to hop on a match race, you would just fill out your information, send it out, and someone could search it and say, you're the exact person I need, you're close by, come drive and join me in an event. Another fun way that I recently got into team racing, and I'm hoping to do a little bit of match racing, is a virtual regatta, which is created by U.S. Sailing, World Sailing. Just last night, I hopped on and did some team racing against some fellow college coaches on virtual regatta. Just 6 of us hopped on a custom race. We each had 3 colored sails, 3 yellow against 3 blue, and it was around a fleet racing course, but we still just decided to team race instead. So even if you're stuck inside, you can still do it.
Tip, yeah, brush up on your match racing while you're quarantined. Janel, before we move on, we had a couple of good questions that came through that I think you could speak to well. So can you speak about the student athlete and the balance of school and sport for sailing? Does it differ among schools?
I'm not sure I understand differ among schools. I think it's a personal choice. And as a sailing coach, you didn't come to college to sail, hopefully. You came to school to get an education and then think about what you want to use your education for in the future. And that could include sailing, but your classes are the most important thing that you do. So I think sailing should always be a fun thing that you can release to and do at the end of your day if your practices are from 3 to 5. But as a coach, I would never ask you to sail more than you would do your studies. And I think if you had to front load anything, it would be a good student first. Make sure you have good friends or in contact with your family, and then go sailing because it's fun.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the balance of being a student athlete helps a lot of students become a better student because they have to budget their time appropriately and really stay focused in order to keep up with their commitments. And they have a rigorous schedule to keep up with each day. And they have a lot of teammates who are keeping an eye on them and making sure they're showing up in the right places at the right time. So I think there's actually a ton of advantages academically to that approach. One more question, and then I'll let you go for a little while, Janel. What about the off season? We know that there's a spring and a fall season of college sailing, but there's a little period of time there that might be a month or a couple months. What do different teams do during that period?
Sure. I don't know if we mean the off season in the winter time, in between the academic seasons, or in the summer, but in the winter time, things that Georgetown does, for example, is we still have access to workouts, that you could do twice a week for an hour. We still have Wednesday night meetings where we come and talk about theory. We still try to have some sort of non-sailing related social event where, people can go get pizza together or see a movie or do something like that. But as far as like the sailing component, it's good to take a break and focus on some other things that you may have not been able to during the busy sailing season, but still keep a routine, which is what JP was talking about before, is having structure makes school easy, but reducing the amount of sailing lets you catch up with things. So I think those breaks are good to stop sailing for a little bit, get everything else in track, and then keep some good routines like workouts, fitnesses, and talking to friends.
Thank you, Janel.
Yeah.
We'll see you in a few minutes for the Q&A at the end. And in the chat, we actually got a perfect question for the segue. Jonathan asked, what are some of the best practices for college admissions for competitive sailors? And that is exactly what we're going to talk about next. So we're going to talk about some tips for future college sailors, including admissions here. Keep your questions coming in the chat box. It makes it flow a little easier. This is one of my old teams at George Washington University, so I couldn't help but throw them in there. That was on a spring break trip in Charleston, South Carolina. All right, so first off, you're a youth sailor, a high school sailor, you're interested in college sailing. How do you prepare? What do you do from a sport perspective to be prepared? So these are my personal bullet points. As a coach, every coach or expert is going to have a different perspective. So I can't say this is the end all be all, but this is a good, honest take. So first and foremost, you want to be a really good sailor. And college sailing really rewards versatility. The reason for that is you're sailing a lot of races in a lot of different venues. You may be asked to play different roles or take on different positions. And so what can sometimes be a very controlled environment in other types of sailing with a very specific boat or specific racing format is kind of opened up. So you want to be as versatile as you can be. One example of that would be that if you are on the dinghy team, let's say, and you want to be a double-handed dinghy skipper, but if you also have the crewing skill set and you can jump in as a crew and you've developed those skills, that's a huge value add. And better yet, can you jump in and do bow on the match race team and help out with that? Do you have experience on keelboats, flying spinnakers, that kind of thing? Can you jump in the laser and do some of those single-handed events? You know, the more versatile you are, the more well-rounded you are, the better. And so part of that is my advice would be sail all the boats. There is no right boat. I think in the youth sailing side, there's often a perception amongst youth sailors that you need to have double-handed dinghy experience before coming to college in order to be successful as a college sailor in double-handed dinghies, meaning that they think that they should spend a lot of time in the FJ or a lot of time in the Club 420. And certainly time in the water in the Club 420 or the FJ is great. But rather than just focusing on that one thing, the better goal is to sail hard boats against hard competition. So an example would be, you know, if you can get out there at your regional or national fleet in another type of boat, sail against really high level competition, let's say it's in the Snipe or the Lightning or the Laser, and you're sailing against the best competition available to you, that's going to pay off big time when you get to college. That is much better than dominating the youth only competition in a 10 or 12 boat fleet of FJs or something. So make sure you're sailing against the hardest competition possible, and also sail hard boats. Learning to sail more complex boats before college will help you in that transition. Even though the college sailing dinghies tend to be very basic, I have observed a lot of sailors who transition from sailing higher performance boats, and you can see the skill set transfer into the lower performance college sailing boats. For example, skiff sailors will tend to be very good in very light wind and very heavy wind in the double-handed dinghies. In very light wind, they have a very fine-tuned sense of the apparent wind and how to build pressure in the sails and keep the boat moving. They've developed that in the 29er, and it transfers well to the college format. Laser sailors tend to be really good at hiking, and so they make great heavy air sailors in the double-handed dinghies. So all this is to say, sail hard boats against hard competition. If you're worried about building your resume, follow that rule, sail hard boats against hard competition. The coaches who are reading your resumes will know, because they follow the sport closely, what a hard boat and a hard competition is. So follow that rule, and I think you'll build your resume and your skills nicely. Tip number 3 is be an athlete. Probably the biggest change in college sailing in the last 20 years or so is that it used to be kind of a rarity for college sailors or teams of college sailors to be true athletes and to have trained and built up a fitness level where they are not getting tired. Their fitness is not hindering their performance on the water, regardless of the conditions. Now that's really more the standard. It's more rare to see teams that don't have the fitness that they need than the teams that do. So as a prospective sailor, as a youth sailor, start to build up that fitness, get familiar with what exercise and, well-being and nutrition is all about. Playing other sports is great for fitness. So if you can, do swimming or track through your high school team while also maintaining your sailing, that's great. It's okay to take an off season from sailing. You don't necessarily have to sail year round. There's a lot of evidence out there that shows that the best eventual performers, when they're peak ability, whether that's as college athletes or as Olympic athletes, those peak performers played multiple sports at the youth level. So there's a big problem with over specialization at the youth level. It pays off in the short term, but in the long run, you're not going to peak to be that best athlete you can be. So if you can play other sports, build that into your routine, that's great. Or just develop your own routine, figure out what works for you, join a gym, do yoga, but just get fit. And then last but not least, the sort of off-water and soft skills that are so important to success in college sailing. Be a competitor and be a teammate. So that includes honing your ability to learn. Most college sailors will show up to their first couple practices as freshmen and struggle, and they should. They're new to it. It's a whole new ball game, and it's actually sort of alarming. You really don't want anyone to show up and think they've got it all figured out from day one. You're there to learn. So build up an ability to learn and build up an ability to be successful. I'm a big believer that if you're successful in one discipline in life, it'll transfer to other disciplines. So if you're a great cellist, which I think Janel is actually a great concert cellist, if I'm not mistaken, that's going to transfer to your sailing when the time comes. If you do really well academically, or you're a leader at your school, or you're a great artist, that's going to transfer to your sailing. So don't be shy about building up those other areas of success in your life. And then lastly, college sailing is a team sport. A lot of new college sailors struggle because they're used to being basically an individual on the water in their sailing. And they're now thrown into a team environment where their individual success is secondary to the team success. So that might mean that at the regatta, they are not playing the role that they thought they were going to, because that's not for the best of the team. It also might mean that as a younger sailor, you might have to let some of the upperclassmen have their moment. You might have to kind of, be mentored by them, as Janel was saying. So teamwork definitely does make the dream work in college sailing. All right, so that's a little bit about how to prepare. Next up, we're going to talk about the real juicy topic, college admissions. And I can't claim to have this one completely figured out, because I don't think anyone does. I think college admissions is obviously a huge challenging thing for high school students and parents and everybody. But I do have some firsthand experience from the coaching side. And I also, went through it myself way back when. So a couple of tips here on college admissions, and feel free to throw your questions in the chat box. The first thing first, when you're going through your college admissions search, you got to know what type of school you're looking for. Take sailing out of it for a while. What is your academic focus? What size school are you looking for? What locations are you interested in? What's your type? And you might not know your academic focus, but you at least probably know some of the things you're not interested in. So don't be shy about sort of eliminating some of those things. And I put here the red flag, which is that when I was coaching, I didn't like seeing kids who were applying to a random assortment of schools, and the only tangible kind of thing that was holding it all together was that sailing was the common theme. It's okay to make sailing a priority, but make sure that your academics and other pieces of the puzzle also make sense. If you're applying to, a tiny school in the middle of the country, a tiny liberal arts college, a giant school in the city that focuses on engineering, and a mid-sized school that's on the beach in Florida, you might say, what exactly are you looking for? Okay. So you got to be honest with yourself with that. Second priority here is visit schools and get a feel for them. So aside from sort of the tangible pieces, what are the intangible things? What is the feel, the vibe that you like? Make sure you check it out, and because it's going to be your home for 4 years, and you want to feel comfortable, you want to feel like it's a place where you can grow and kind of come into your own. And it might not feel perfectly comfortable. In fact, it definitely shouldn't. but make sure it has something that kind of draws you in. And the red flag there is attending a school you've never visited. It does happen and it can be successful, but I would question why you would do that if you do have the option to visit. All right. And then my third tip here is do your homework, put your best foot forward. This is where we get into sort of the tricky stuff. If there's any pull available, which is pull is generally a term used for when a coach, an advisor, a professor, someone within the school is trying to kind of give you a leg up through the admissions process. You need to ask about that, whether you're talking to a coach, a team captain, a club sports advisor, a professor of the program that you're interested in. Make sure you ask, are there any programs? Is there any special kind of admissions process? Don't assume anything. So one of the challenges of being a college, a prospective college student is that you are going to have to communicate. You're going to ask questions and be proactive. And a lot of teenagers don't like that. I certainly didn't when I was a teenager, but it's really important that you do communicate proactively. The red flags here is one of them would be email the team contact once and you don't hear back. And then you assume they're not interested and you don't follow up at all and you don't apply to that school. You got to advocate for yourself. I do know for a fact that this happens and people will assume, oh, they don't want me or something. No, it's just that your email didn't get answered. It happens all the time. Another red flag, and this is a toughie for the parents out there, parent emails, it's really way better for the communication to come from the kid. And we know the parents have the best intentions, but it says a lot about the kid and you can learn a lot about the kid as a coach by communicating with them a little bit. And that's going to carry over to how they are as a teammate and as a player on your team. So really the communication should come from the kids. There's a question in here. What is the best way to get in contact with college coaches? I would say email is probably the first step. And then honestly, dropping in on a college visit early on and just saying hello, if you can track them down, is also a good way to go. But email is probably the primary. All right, so here's a quick sample timeline on how you might go about applying for college. This is just based off of generic. There could be a lot of other aspects to this. Freshman or sophomore year, what's the point? Get the flavor of the schools. Get the flavor of college sailing. You know it's something you're interested in, but try to start to learn what's going on. Follow college sailing on social media. Go to a regatta near you if there is one and just check it out. Also visit schools, even if they're not ones you're interested in, visit them early on as a freshman or sophomore. Just do a college tour. Just show up. You don't have to do anything sailing related. Just check out the school, get a feel for it. That can be helpful in the long run. And then the big focus for freshman, sophomore year is just do what you do. Study hard, do your homework, enjoy yourself, do a lot of sailing. Don't stress yourself out, but just do what you do. Usually junior year is when the kind of more active part of the college search will take place. So in the fall of the junior year, my recommendation would be to make contact with all the teams that are on your long list and just ask some general questions. Send a bunch of emails to the team contacts and just express interest, say who you are. Ideally, you would include a short one-page sailing resume, which would simply say who you are, what high school you go to, roughly what kind of grades you get, roughly what your academic interest is, and then list off some of the sailing that you've been doing lately. You don't need to include every regatta of all time, but throw your top 5 or 10 regattas on there. Talk about a little bit of what your interests are, both academically and sailing, and keep it short. And then visit a few schools if you can during the fall of your junior year. And my advice there is at some point you need to decide what you don't like. You got to visit some places and say, ooh, I don't think that's what I want to do. That's going to help with clarifying what you do want to do later on. Spring of junior year, it's time to really visit your top picks. Try to schedule time to sit down and talk to coaches or team leaders, team captains, whether it's a club team, and they're probably trying to recruit people to join the team and take on leadership roles. They'd probably be happy to sit down and have lunch with you or take you down to their sailing facility and show you around. Coaches might want to give you a tour of their athletic department or just sit down and chat for a few minutes. This is a good time to ask the early questions about how the admissions process works, because every school really is different. So you might want to just ask, hey, I think I'm going to be applying. What is some of the key deadlines? Do you guys do any kind of formal recruiting? Is there any kind of process I should know about? And then fall, the senior year, is really when the rubber meets the road. You got to start dialing it in. Do an overnight visit at some of your top picks if possible. See if you can stay overnight with a college student, either somebody from the sailing team or somebody through the admissions office. It's a good experience to see what it's like. Start thinking about your admissions deadlines. You're thinking maybe early decision anywhere or just regular decision. And make sure you understand all the admissions processes. That could be just through the regular admissions office, or if you're working through a coach or an athletic department for any kind of, special pull or early reads, that might be a good time to throw that out there. The early read that I put in quotes is that sometimes the coach can take your high school transcript and some of your test scores and send them to the admissions office early, maybe in the beginning of the fall, and get preliminary feedback from admissions to give you an idea of whether you might get in. Not every school is going to have that, and every school is going to have a different version of that, but it's worth asking those questions. And then just a couple facts here. Fact number one, there are no athletic scholarships for sailors. Okay, this is against the ICSA procedural rules, and it would make you ineligible as a college sailor. So even if it's a Division I varsity athletic department that includes sailing, the ICSA rules are still going to apply along with the NCAA rules. And the ICSA rules mean that no scholarship dollars are allowed based on your athletic ability. So that there are no college sailing scholarships. Academic scholarships are definitely okay and worth pursuing. So if you can get a merit scholarship of some sort or some kind of special designation through an academic program, go for it. But again, those can't be based on athletic ability, and the coach, if there is a coach at that school, is not going to be able to influence those academic scholarships. Fact number three, 90% of the time, if not more, the coach is not going to reach out to you. I personally, when I was college sailing coaching, I never, ever, not once, proactively reached out to a recruit without them contacting me first. So it's really on you to contact the coaches first. Don't wait at home for the phone to ring. You got to show up. You got to show interest. You got to pull yourself together. Don't expect the coaches. The coaches are too busy, and really they're not. It's not college basketball or something where they're going to be knocking on your door. And then to reiterate, asking for recruiting pull is okay. It's okay to ask for that. It might be a little uncomfortable, but just ask them, hey, is there any kind of special recruiting process for, prospective athletes? Is there any chance that's going to improve my chances of getting in? What info can I provide? They might ask you for a copy of your high school transcript or your test scores. And frankly, the answer might be there's no pull available. Either we don't have pull at all, or we have a little bit of pull and we've already used it on some other sailors. And that's okay. Just apply anyway. Don't take that personally. It's just a tricky process. Mitch, who's in the chat box, Mitch Brindley, president of ICSA, says complete the FAFSA on time and more academic aid is available earlier in the process. I didn't know that. So the FAFSA form is pretty important. All right. So with that, I'm going to welcome our second guest, Allison Crowley. She's coming to us from California. How's it going, Allison?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So we wanted to have the undergraduate perspective to all this. And after looking around a little bit, I thought Allison would be a really good fit. She is a graduating senior, finishing up her college experience at Cal Poly on the beautiful California coast, majoring in nutrition. She's the president of the Cal Poly sailing team and also the undergrad president for the Pacific Coast College Sailing Conference, which means that she's really plugged in with the sort of student leadership side of the ICSA, and also of a club sailing team, which I was reading some of the info that you provided, Allison, that said that when you first got to Cal Poly, there were only a handful of boats and a handful of sailors, and you guys really built it up while you were there. What was that process like of student leadership?
Yeah, so honestly, when I joined the team, like when I was applying to colleges, I was pretty worried about choosing a team that didn't have varsity status and didn't have structure. And when I got there, our team was really small and we didn't have a whole lot, but we did have a couple of really motivated sailors who also came from competitive backgrounds like I did. And we kind of like took the team and turned it around and implemented like leadership structure. We started fundraising. We really like did a lot of the things that we saw teams around us doing. And we were able to kind of like turn the whole team around. We bought a fleet of 10 boats. We grew our team, like we pretty much doubled, tripled the number of people on our team. And we ended up qualifying for nationals my sophomore year for the first time in our like team's 50-year history, which was amazing. And like probably one of the best moments ever. So I think, yeah, the process was tough, but like it's really possible.
To point out that some of the conversation that Janel and I are having is from this coach's perspective of the teams that have full-time coaching, but a vast majority of the college sailing teams are student-led with little to no coaching. So what's it like when you're sort of both a participant and a racer, but also kind of playing some of those coaching and leadership roles? How did that work out for you?
Yeah, so I've been in leadership roles like pretty much my entire time on the team, and that's been super cool because I feel like I've really gotten to shape the team the way I want it to go and really be as competitive as I want to be and like help my peers be as competitive as they want to be. But it's definitely hard to be like an athlete and to be pushing yourself as hard as you can, um, and like pushing your teammates at the same time as being the person to make the decision of who's going to sail varsity A, who's going to be your starter. And it really takes a lot to like kind of be introspective and think about that at the same time as like being working as hard as you can to be on the top. Um, yeah.
But those are fantastic life skills. I mean, I think running a club sailing team is a little bit like running a small business with the fundraising, with the finances, the logistics, the travel. So great experience. And rewinding to when you were like a high schooler, what were you thinking when you were thinking about applying to colleges and college sailing? And is there anything that you kind of wish you knew then that you know now?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is when you're applying to schools, there's really a big like club team versus varsity team. I think like a misconception, because there are those titles, but there's also a huge range within those. So like there are club teams that have development teams that don't have a coach that are really like getting off the ground, and there are also club teams that are like just as funded as varsity teams, attending nationals every single year. And I think it's really important to do your research and really see like what their status is and like what the sailors on their team are really experiencing, and then like being honest with yourself about what you want as a college athlete and how hard you want to work and how the intensity of sailing you want, and really like obviously pick your school for the education, but also make sure you think about the team, and how that's going to like apply to your life and what you want.
Yeah, exactly. It really is a spectrum of options, and it's one of the coolest things about college sailing. Really, is that there's a lot of intermingling, and then when you get out on the start line, it's all equal, and everybody's just playing the same game, regardless of what their team structure is. And so, how did you end up at Cal Poly? Like, in a nutshell, what was your college search like?
Yeah, so I was kind of doing the thing you were saying, like applying to a bunch of random schools. But I think I really wanted a school where like it was really like hands-on learning kind of thing, and that's kind of how I ended up at Cal Poly. slogan is learn by doing. And I liked the idea of living in California because I can, at least on the Pacific Coast, we sail all year long, like through winter, obviously because the weather's good enough that we can keep sailing. And that was something that was really attractive to me when I was looking at schools. So kind of back to what you were saying about like location and where you want to be living, that's a huge thing as well. And yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking. Also my major, I love my major, and the fact that Cal Poly has nutrition is really cool.
Perfect. Yeah, it's not an exact science. So I think a lot of it comes down to sort of gut instinct and just seeing what your options are and pursuing some of them to see what pans out. What about from a sailing perspective, when you were, a youth sailor, what kind of sailing were you doing, and what's been helpful to you now that you've been a college sailor?
Yeah, so I started out sailing opties when I was like 8 or whatever, and then I pretty quickly transitioned to Club 420s and did the like East Coast circuits and all of that, and sailed 29ers and like dabbled in random other boats here and there just to kind of like feel things out and learn as much as I could. And then I did all 4 years of high school sailing, and I think like kind of what you were saying earlier, like just trying out everything and really like experiencing everything you can as a youth sailor, just because there are so many options, and so many resources when you're young, and really trying to take advantage of all the clinics and like all the traveling that you can do when you still have like not a ton of responsibilities. You can go wherever you want if you can, and like just like being exposed as much as you can. And also like sailing in high school, that really I think gave me a leg up sailing in college, just because I was used to the small boat racing and short courses, and really like pushing myself like all the way through my youth, I think.
Cool. And then one more question that Scott kind of brought up in the chat box here, but can you talk a little bit about like what the camaraderie is like, within college sailing as a whole and within your conference, and sort of the way that you get to interact with other people from other teams and other universities?
Yeah, I think that's super, super important. I think team culture, like within your team and within your conference, it's huge because those are the people you're practicing with, the people you're like traveling every single weekend. All of your social events are all going to be with that group of people. And I think that was one thing I forgot to mention earlier, like looking at schools, it's really important to really take that into consideration of like about the teams that you're looking at. And a lot of the schools I was applying to, I already knew sailors on the team, so I was able to reach out to them and ask them about that. And that was like a huge deciding factor about me coming to Cal Poly as well, was just knowing about like how supportive everybody is and how much of like a tight knit group our team is, and that is such a huge thing. And I know like culture really depends on the conference as well. At least on the West Coast, like all of the teams I feel like are really close and connected, and I really feel like I have a network of people all the way down the coast. Just people that I've either known prior to college sailing or I've met in college sailing, and like I hang out with them on the water, off the water. And I think that's like probably one of my favorite parts of college sailing is the people and all of the friendships that you make. So that's a really great point.
It is. That's the most memorable part. People say that, in 20 years, you're not going to remember how you finished at the regatta, but you're going to definitely remember, the friends that you were there with and like the experiences you had and stuff. So I don't know, Allison, do you have any other input or items before we go to the Q&A?
That's pretty much it. I think like no matter where you pick, you're going to be able to do what you want to do and sail and be competitive. But yeah, good luck to all the high schoolers.
Totally. Yeah, well, stick around with us here, Allison, and maybe we'll invite Janel to come back on too. And we're going to open it up now for the Q&A here. Ask us anything. We're all pretty impartial at this point, so we'd love to see your questions in the chat box. One of the ones I saw a few minutes ago was, how would you suggest juniors talk to coaches and teammates if college visits are canceled until later in the year? That that's a really good point. There's definitely, obviously, not the opportunity to travel right now. So I don't know, Allison, Janel, do you have any thoughts on how you would communicate during this time period with teams you're interested in?
Zoom conferencing, maybe. Email, definitely. I know, at least for us, like, we have a Cal Poly email or Cal Poly sailing email, and we're always looking at that, and we get emails all the time from prospective sailors just asking us about the team. So.
I think email is a good first place to start. You can make it fairly regular and shameless, but as far as like updating with new information, you know, maybe that's once every 2 weeks, and maybe a coach can connect you with a sailor on the team to answer questions that you would have gotten answers about if you visited in person.
Exactly. Sounds like good answer. Another one we have is, do you have any tips for a student applying to college sailing programs internationally, specifically the UK? So I'm wondering if that is an American applying to an international school or a international person applying to the US. I would say that if you're international applying to the US, it's pretty much the same process. You want to send emails, you want to make contact with the team contacts, especially make sure that all the admissions guidelines are followed, because international admissions is a little bit different. I don't know about a US athlete applying internationally, though. I don't know if, Janel, do you have any experience with that? Or do you know much about the British college sailing?
I don't know enough to talk about the British circuit or applying in any way. I'm sorry.
I know that the British are very social. We'll just leave it at that. I think their college sailing scene is very social. Lots of formal events. Mm-hmm. Super. How does campaigning for the Olympics fit in with college? That's a great question. Janel, I want to punt this to you because there's a lot of Hoya alumni who have been doing Olympic level sailing.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a balance, again, of your priorities with school and with an Olympic campaign. So if you're choosing to start an Olympic campaign while you're still finishing school, it usually means taking a break. So you'll stop school, focus on training, and then you'll come back. But that's something that's very flexible with any school across the US. If those are your priorities, they'll make it happen. It's just a choice. It's a big choice that you and your family will have to make to take a break from college and come back, hopefully come back, and while you pursue your dreams to do the Olympic campaign. So you can definitely do both.
I think especially with that domestic circuit of, excuse me, the LA 2028 lead up and those Olympic class regattas in Long Beach and San Francisco and San Diego. I think that hopefully some new campaigning sailors can, spend their summers in California and get a lot of quality reps in, and also keep their costs down because, traveling and competing domestically is much, much, much cheaper than going to Europe. And certainly when I was growing up and when I was in college, the whole narrative was, if you want to be in Olympic sailing, you got to go to Europe every year. And I was like, I can't afford that. It's not going to happen. So I think this is a big opportunity for people to set up shop in California each summer and do that Olympic level sailing. I don't remember the exact stat, but there's 200 plus college age sailors currently sailing those Olympic boats, which might not be seem like a huge number, but that's a pretty significant number of people who are sort of on that early campaign trail and working with the Olympic development program. So if you're interested in that, getting in touch with the Olympic development program, getting in touch with Oak Cliff and their programs for high performance sailing, you got to just show up. That's the most important thing. Next question. How regularly should a sailor be contacting college coaches? I'll start with this and then we can get second opinions. I would say earlier on in the process, maybe in junior year, once or twice a semester is probably enough, unless there's something specific coming up. Like if you're going to be on campus in 2 months, yeah, send that email and then send a follow-up a couple weeks before. And then, we could email again to confirm where we're going to meet up. But you don't have to check in all that regularly early on. But then again, if there's a deadline for your admissions process, your application, things like that during senior year, it's okay to email, have an email back and forth with a coach, every week or two if you need to, but it should be about something. Also, it's great to send updates on information. Hey, coach, just want to let you know I took the ACT again. Here's my new score. Let me know if you need anything else. Janelle, do you have any rebuttals to that?
No, I think what you said is great. I think some sort of regularity, but like once or twice a month, but make sure that there's something new to provide in the information that you're giving, like a new score, a result, a trip that's coming up.
And Allison, how about you from sort of the club leadership perspective? How often do you hear from prospective students?
We usually hear from students once. Sometimes there'll be an email interaction, and then a lot of times I'll meet up with students on campus if they're visiting, and like you said, have lunch with them and show them around our sailing center, or have them come to a club meeting if they can, and like meet the team if they want to. We have a lot of flexibility because there's a lot of students that can like show people around.
Cool. Yeah, I think that often the best recruiters are the club team leaders because they can develop a rapport with the visiting student, whereas sometimes the old coach can be a little bit intimidating or hard to break the ice with. Next question from Owen. How necessary is college sailing if you plan to pursue high-level racing? Is it okay to practice outside, assuming you want to train in a boat not supported by colleges? I would say that it's not necessary to do college sailing if that's not what you're interested in. If we're talking about double-handed dinghies, team racing and fleet racing, but you're passionate about big boat sailing, you're passionate about kiteboarding, you're passionate about Olympic class sailing, you might make a decision to set yourself up at a college experience where you can practice and train with those disciplines in mind. You might also find a place that has a college sailing experience where you can participate in college sailing and do that double-handed dinghy stuff, but maybe it's at a lower expectation or a lower time frame, and you're able to still train predominantly in the boats that you like to sail. So there's no requirement, that's for sure. That will be said. I will say that you're going to learn a heck of a lot in college sailing, though. So don't overlook it as an opportunity. Again, just getting all those hundreds of races in, very, very high level. You learn a lot about how to win races. Janelle, you have any follow-ups to that?
No, I think it's great. It shadows what you mentioned earlier about sailing at the highest level you can. So if you've chosen a different boat that's not within college sailing, just find where those boats are being sailed and sail them at the highest level you can as often as possible. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. College sailing is a great step along the way, though. That's for sure. Lena asks, how much does Olympic sailing cost? And that is a very broad question. It would really depend on the type of boat and the level of Olympic campaign that you're on. Some of the boats like the laser is very affordable, and most of your costs for a laser campaign are going to be related to travel and coaching. So if you can avoid travel, like by spending your time in California each summer sailing those Olympic class regattas, and capitalize on when the world comes to you, you can reduce costs that way. Also, using coaching sparingly or tactically, sharing coaching with other sailors is a huge way to save money. But some of the disciplines, with the more high performance boats or this new mixed offshore double-handed, the equipment itself is more expensive. But getting started is really still a matter of showing up, knowing where the action is, which is usually in either Miami or increasingly in Long Beach and San Francisco out in California. So don't be hesitant to get involved. You don't know what's involved until you start showing up and really getting to be a part of it. Here's another good question. What's the best way to ask coaches about their recruiting pool without feeling too pushy? Yeah. I think the easiest thing is just to ask. Everyone knows that it's potentially out there, and it's better to know up front rather than asking hard questions later. So I would just say that in some of your emails or ideally an in-person meeting, asking, hey, does your team have any relationship with the athletic department or the admissions office that might benefit me or help me get in because I really want to come here? And then if they say, well, yes, maybe a little bit, you can then dig into what does that look like? Do you think I'm the type of sailor who might be considered for something like that? And coaches will be pretty good about telling you, yes, we'd like to pursue that. No, we don't think that's going to pan out. And they'd probably still love to have you on the team, but there's very few opportunities for that kind of recruiting pull to take place. Again, Janel, fact checked me. Anything wrong on that one?
No, that's great. That's great. I think you can be honest and ask. It's something that college coaches know about their specific school, and every school is a little bit different based on the timing of this pull that could happen and how much pull it could include. But just ask. And if the school is very important to you, be honest about that too.
Totally agree. It's great as a coach to know that the school is someone's top pick. If they're like, I just love this school, I love this academic program, but don't fake it. You want to be authentic about that. Emma asks, are there any differences between the Canadian teams that are a part of the ICSA or the American teams? And I think from an ICSA perspective, the answer is no. I think they're all equal parts of the association, have equal opportunity to go to the nationals and things like that. So it's cool that there's some Canadian teams that participate. All right, I'm looking at the chat box. It's slowing down. Did we miss any?
I do have some earlier ones that got scrolled past throughout your guys' conversations if you want me to bring these up again.
Sure, why not?
All right, so first, this is kind of a good talking point, but maybe you can speak to how this could be an advantage throughout the season. This is an observation. Lots of college sailors in the Midwest are also youth coaches and instructors at their home clubs during the summer, and I think this is true around the country. That might be worth talking about a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think college sailing and being a sailing instructor or sailing coach yourself go hand in hand. Being a sailing instructor is a great summer job, and college sailors are highly coveted for such jobs. There's a lot of demand out there for good instructors. So certainly if you're a college student and you passionate about the sport and enjoy teaching it, there's a ton of opportunities out there. And it's also a good career experience. I will say that being a sailing instructor is really an educator type role. And if you're like a head instructor, it's also like a manager type role. So you can use that in future career conversations, job interviews, talk about how when you were the head instructor, you managed, 6 other staff members and were in charge of 100, kids, and you did the medical forms and all that stuff. And that will carry weight in a job interview. We have one from Tanner here. Tanner, this is a good one. How often do club teams have pull? How often do varsity and club teams provide an early read to recruits? Good questions. There definitely are club teams that have academic or admissions pull, but not that many. So I would say that's a relatively rare case. Often those clubs are sort of referred to as super clubs. They're basically a club team structure, but with the funding and the coaching and the infrastructure of a varsity team. Brown University is often used as an example of that, but there are definitely many others. So they may well have some pull. Most of the smaller club teams may not have official pull, but they sometimes have like an academic advisor or a professor that they work with who is willing to help out and will maybe write a letter on your behalf. So it's worth exploring some of those opportunities to get, really any little leg up in the admissions process. And when should you ask coaches about pull? I would say somewhere in the spring of junior year or the fall of senior year. depends on kind of where the conversation is. But if you're starting to talk about grades and test scores, and if there's any discussion about sort of, we're going to do an early read through the admissions office, it'd be appropriate to ask then, what does this mean? How does this work at your school? The most extreme case is at the Ivy Leagues and some other big institutions where they have something called a likely letter, which is like an actual thing that would tell you that you're pretty damn likely to get into the college. The most casual example would be that simply the athletic department might say your grades and test scores, meet the average standard for our student athletes, and we think you have a good chance of getting in. But there's no guarantees in either of those, really. Talking about pull, that's the thing that people don't really like to talk about. So that's why I'm throwing it out there.
All right, and I think we've got one more, unless we see any more come in throughout this question. We just started our sailing team at the University of Cincinnati. I was wondering if you had any thoughts of the best or fastest way to get our new sailors up to speed to a more competitive level.
Ooh, that sounds like a good one for Allison.
Yeah, so our team has some experience with this. The way we kind of have our team structured is we have like a development sort of program, and then we have like our varsity sailors, which are like the same thing, but just kind of like two different levels. And what we try to do is development practices where like all of the varsity sailors are coaches for the development sailors, and we like help them on the water like that. And we have weekly meetings, and after every weekly meeting we have a chalk talk where we just like talk about what happened at practice that week. We talk about drills, we talk about like all kinds of stuff, and we watch videos. And that's kind of like the next step for us is we're going to start a YouTube channel of like past chalk talks, and like videos about tacking, jibing, maneuvers, and that kind of thing for people to watch off the water. And that's how some of our like more development sailors have really gotten a lot better, is just like doing like studying and like getting out on the water as much as they can. This is probably similar to your team, but we don't have priority registration or anything like that. So it's really hard to get people out on the water all at the same time and really have like those big practices for people to really get better. So on the weekends when we don't have competition, we really prioritize those to get everyone out there, get people sailing, like have development sailors sailing with our varsity members, and really like pushing everybody as much as we can at every opportunity. But it's tough.
Yeah, I would say that also like when I first got involved with the George Washington University team, they were still a club team, and they had similar kind of evening chalk talk type things where they'd have video, have students present to each other. And it's worth noting that, that kind of learning where you're teaching others is actually really good, positive learning. So if you're a team member and you're the one leading a chalk talk on starting or boat handling, that's actually helping you learn those skills yourself by teaching. So it's worth doing either way. All right, we got a couple more coming in on the chat box here. Darla asks, do you see any future evolution of the type of boats used in college sailing? It's a topic of much debate. The boats used in college sailing are very simple, but they're also very versatile and very good at what they do. They're especially very good at team racing, which is one of kind of college sailing's best formats and really beloved by most college sailors. So I think if there were an evolution, it might be interesting to see how like the fleet racing equipment might differ from the team racing equipment, for example. But that's a tough question. I don't know if Janel, if you have any thoughts on that topic.
No, I don't have too many thoughts about the topic, but the cost of the boat, because we want to have sailors arrive and the boats be there. If we have 15 to 20 boats that need to be there, that cost has to stay down. So as far as picking a new boat, I think the price point has to be about the same as what they are now, which is like $2,000 a boat or something like that. So I don't see it changing too much. Like, don't fix what ain't broke, but it is very simple. And I think that's something that we could make modifications to in the future.
Right. Yeah, it's institutional sailing. So the institutional boats are a little different than the other boats. And that's why, to Owen's point earlier, if you're passionate about sailing more complex or higher performance boats, you may well have to supplement your college sailing with your own sailing on the side. And that's a good thing. Alfonso asks, if you're a U.S. student enrolled in a U.K. college and you decide to spend a semester abroad in a U.S. college, can you sail with the U.S. college during that semester? I think so. I don't see why not.
Yeah, I think if they meet everything within the procedural rules as being a full-time student and enrolled in that university, I think, yeah. But
all right, and
maybe Mr. President wants to answer that one.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, Mitch, if you're still in the chat, feel free to chime in on that one. Caitlin asks, if you start a high school sailing team for your school, could that help on your college resume? Yes, definitely. I think being a student leader at the high school level, especially starting your own college or a high school sailing team, is a nice resume booster, something that admissions offices would be happy to see. They're looking for students that take initiative and are comfortable with leadership. It may not really help significantly with your college sailing resume from, like, say, a coach's perspective. They would like to see that leadership, but they're going to be more interested in really your sort of performance attributes and what you're going to bring to the team from a competitive level. All right, Brittany, we have any more? We still have people watching. I can't believe it. It's been almost an hour and a half.
I think that's it for the new questions. But if you guys want to hear more about college sailing, stay tuned to the Starboard Portal. We've got some resources coming from some other members of the ICSA, including coaches and sailors. So stay tuned for more content there. Tomorrow, we've also got some great sessions. At 10 a.m., we have a session with Mike Kushner of Sailing Performance Training, and he's going to be leading a live workout at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. And these are all going to be exercises that you can do in a house quarantine environment. And then later in the evening, or afternoon rather, we have Carmen and Emma Coles in Atlantic and Nora Brugman, 4 athletes who are actually 2 sets of siblings that are all U.S. women's 470 sailors on the U.S. sailing team. And they're going to talk about sailing as sisters and their journeys on their campaigns towards the Tokyo 2020, which is still the official name for the games that will now be taking place in 2021. So more on that to come. That'll be at noon Eastern tomorrow. And thanks everybody, Allison, Janelle, and John, for joining us today. I think this was a really informative session for all of the people that want to hear more about college sailing.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittany. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Janelle.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.